Join me as I dive into the origin of the gods in the Bible and see if I can uncover this mysterious backstory, uncover some of these ancient secrets. Where did the gods of the nations around Israel come from? We know that these gods have to be real. Why? Well, Yahweh is extremely specific with his very first commandment given to the Israelites. He says, "You shall have no other gods before me." And just so the Israelites don't miss the point, Yahweh again is very direct with his people shortly before they entered the promised land. This is what he tells them. "You shall not go after other gods, the gods of the people who are around you. For the Lord your God in your midst is a jealous God." There would be no point in Yahweh getting jealous over a sculptured piece of rock or wood. The gods of these nations around Israel were, in fact, a reality. The question before us is, where did these gods come from? But listen, before I tackle this very important question, if you're interested in taking a closer look at what the Bible really says, as opposed to the cookie-cutter, play-it-safe approach of many of the modern pulpits today, then make sure that you subscribe to this channel. I post a new video every week, and I am committed to letting the Bible be the Bible. All right, I am fairly certain that I would be safe in saying that when it comes to gods with a lowercase g, other than Yahweh, most Bible readers believe that these gods are just imaginary. They're just idols made of wood or stone. But that is not the case. For as we've seen, Yahweh was in fact very serious about Israel having nothing to do with the gods that surrounded them. So why is it that we, modern people today, you and me, why do we struggle with this idea of gods? That is, gods with a lowercase g that are written about in the Bible. Why is it such a big deal to us that they could possibly be real? Well, here's why. When it comes to the word God, that is lowercase g, most Bible readers see that word with a capital G. In other words, capital G-O-D, God. And then they assign attributes like sovereignty or omnipresence or omnipotence or omniscience and so forth. And with these kinds of attributes, the conclusion is, hey, there can only be one God who is omnipotent and so forth, and that is Yahweh. He alone is the true God. The rest are all imaginary. They're just fiction. But my friends, that conclusion would be very, very wrong. The most common word in the Old Testament for God is the Hebrew word Elohim, and it has nothing to do with attributes. In a previous video that I did entitled "The Shocking Truth About Elohim in the Bible," I demystify this common word for God in the Bible, that is the word Elohim. In this video, "The Shocking Truth About Elohim in the Bible," you're going to learn that the word Elohim is a place of residence term. Elohim has absolutely nothing to do with attributes like omnipotence or omniscience. In the Old Testament, you discover that Yahweh is called Elohim. But you also discover that the sons of God are called Elohim. In fact, angels and demons are called Elohim. And if that isn't enough, even deceased humans are called Elohim. And most important for our discussion, in this video, we're going to discover that the gods of the Bible, that is, the gods of the foreign nations, they too are called Elohim. And what do all of them have in common? They are all disembodied beings living in the supernatural. Now, if you've not watched this video, please let me just encourage you to do so. It is really going to help you understand, particularly when you get a good grasp of this word Elohim. The link for this video, you can find it in the comment section below. Now, one more fact that we need to keep in our frontal lobe is this. The Bible makes very clear, and please note this, Yahweh is an Elohim, but no other Elohim is Yahweh. Yahweh is the creator of all the Elohim, all of them. Only Yahweh is sovereign. Only Yahweh is omnipresent, omnipotent, omniscient. He alone possesses these attributes. Yahweh is an Elohim, but no other Elohim is Yahweh. Now, our topic for this video is, where did these gods of the nations that surrounded Israel, where did they come from? These gods of other nations, they are called Elohim in the Bible, but how did they come into existence? How did these nations around Israel come to be? How did the people come to worship these gods? Well, you're going to find this really interesting. The origin of these gods that the other nations worship, that is, the nations around Israel, their origin, that is found in a very common story. A story that, I might add, is really not that well understood. It is the tower story, the Tower of Babel story, found in Genesis 11. The people of the world, when you're reading in Genesis 11, came together at this period in human history, and they said this, "Come, let us build ourselves a city and a tower with its top in the heavens, and let us make a name for ourselves." The tower building story is seen by most people as just a hapless construction project that was never finished. The whole affair ends with the language of the people being confused, and then these same people are scattered over the face of the earth. And for most Bible readers, end of story. Nothing more to see here. Ooh, not so fast. Slow down. There is far more to see in this ill-fated project. This building of a tower story is very important to our subject in this video. Where did the gods of the nations around Israel come from? In fact, the implications and the outcome of the decision to build the tower at Babel are crucial to understanding much of what happens in the Old Testament. Well, let's begin by identifying the people building this tower in Genesis 11. These people are the descendants of Noah's sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. You can see their family trees, their genealogies in chapter 10. These three sons, together with their wives, survived the great flood in their father's ark, that is, Noah. When the floodwaters receded, Noah's ark made landfall, and then Noah, together with his three sons and their wives, embarked upon dry land. And they were then given the exact same mandate as Adam and Eve, and this is significant. They were told to be fruitful, to multiply, and take dominion of the earth. Let me read in Genesis 9. God blessed Noah and his sons and said to them, "Be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth. The fear of you and the dread of you shall be upon every beast of the earth, and upon every bird of the heavens, upon everything that creeps on the ground, and all the fish into the sea. Into your hand they are delivered." This mandate is critical. These sons, together with their families, were told to spread out over the earth. But as the generations of Noah's sons began to expand, they reached a point where they decided, nope, we're not going to spread out anymore. In fact, we are going to come together, and we're going to all come together at one place. We're going to build this city called Babel. And not only that, we're going to build a tower. This is what we read. "Come, let us build ourselves a city and a tower with its top in the heavens. let us make a name for ourselves, lest we be dispersed over the face of the whole earth. What were these people wanting to do? They were wanting to build a tower to the heavens. In other words, a tower, this is what was known in the ancient world as a ziggurat. They wanted to build this tower that went very high. Why? They were wanting to make a name for themselves. They had no intention of spreading out over the earth. Their entire purpose was to come together as one, and they would stay together. And then they would build a tower to make a name for themselves. They would disobey God's command, and more to the point, the descendants of Noah's sons were rejecting Yahweh as their God. Huge, huge thing we need to keep in our mind. As Yahweh's imagers, they disobeyed God's mandate to fill the earth. Instead, they came together, they built one city, Babel, and then they built this tower to the heavens to make a name for themselves. They were in essence declaring to Yahweh, we don't want you. Our name, not your name, our name is the only one that matters. And what we learn in Genesis 11 is that God, Yahweh, stops the project. He confuses the language of the people and then scatters them over the face of the earth. Then in Genesis 12, we discover that Yahweh begins again with Abraham. And for most Bible readers, the Tower of Babel story ends with the beginning of Abraham's story. But here is an important question. What happened to these people that were scattered in Genesis 11? What became of them? Well, their story is crucial in answering the question of where did the gods of the nations around Israel come from? And before we even get to the origin of these gods, we need to ask, how did these various nations come about? I mean, up to this point, there has been no nation whatsoever. Where do these nations come from? Where did the people go? Where did the nations come from? Well, listen, the answer to these questions, believe it or not, found in Genesis 11, the tower story, the Tower of Babel story. There is more to this story, but we're going to have to read further to get the rest of the story. The conclusion to the tower story of Genesis 11 is unveiled in Deuteronomy 32. In this chapter, Moses recalls an important moment in Israel's history that includes the nations around Israel. Yahweh will create these nations and then disinherit these nations as his people. Significant, as we're going to see. This storyline is unveiled in Deuteronomy 32, verses 8 through 9. Moses tells the people to remember the days of old, the events that happened long ago. He says, ask your fathers, ask your grandfathers, they will tell you. And then Moses recounts what Yahweh did in response to the people in Genesis 11 building that tower. He brings to mind when the Most High gave to the nations their inheritance, when he divided mankind, he fixed the borders of the peoples according to the number of the sons of God. But the Lord's portion is his people. Jacob is his allotted heritage. What Moses is doing is he's telling the Israelites to go back in time, a long time ago, to reflect back to that tower building story that we read about in chapter 11 of Genesis. Now, let me separate verses 8 and 9 in Deuteronomy 32. Let me separate those into two sections. In this first section, that is in verse 8, we're going to see how Yahweh creates the nations around Israel. When the Most High gave to the nations their inheritance, when he divided mankind, he fixed the borders of these people according to the number of the sons of God. Note in this verse, Yahweh gives to these people that he scattered in Genesis 11 their inheritance. Notice that? When the Most High gave to the nations their inheritance. What inheritance? What's he talking about? He's talking about land, people. Yahweh gives them land. Land is their inheritance. He divides the people into groups, that is, into nations. And then he's going to establish the borders around each of these nations. That is, the land that each of these groups of people occupied. Do you see that? When he divided mankind, he fixed the borders of the people according to the number of the sons of God. We're going to get to that latter part in just a moment, because that's where these gods are going to come in. This concept of the people being scattered and borders being fixed, and they get their allotted inheritance, if you will, land, this is where we get the concept of cosmic geography. Now realize that that phrase, cosmic geography, probably is first time you've ever heard that, probably unknown to you. But believe me, to ancient people, cosmic geography was very, very important. Cosmic geography is the idea that certain ground or land is holy, while other ground is unholy. The land of Israel was holy. The Israelites understood their ground as holy. And by the word holy, what I mean is it is uncommon, because that's what the word holy means. Something that is set apart, that is unique to everything else around it. That which is holy is uncommon, as opposed to that which is unholy or common. The land of Israel was holy because of the presence of Yahweh in that land. You might recall, remember when Moses came upon that burning bush? And God speaks to him through that burning bush and tells him to take his sandals off, because the ground upon which he's standing is holy ground, uncommon ground, because this is the ground that Yahweh occupies. This is the concept of cosmic geography. And the land of the nations that were around Israel, they were unholy or uncommon because these nations were not under the rule of Yahweh. Yahweh has disinherited these people. These nations are now under the dominion of hostile gods. And you might ask, what gods? What are you talking about? Where'd these gods come from? Well, we're getting there. Let's get back to the Deuteronomy text and note that Yahweh does something else in addition to dividing the people into nations. Yahweh will fix the borders of these people according to the number of the sons of God. And this fact, as I've already alluded to, very important to our question, where did the gods of the nations around Israel come from? Let's go back to Deuteronomy 32:8. When the Most High gave to the nations their inheritance, when he divided mankind, he fixed the borders of the people according to the number of the sons of God. Note in that verse that Yahweh assigns a son of God. A son of God was a member of God's divine council, and he's assigning a son of God over each of these nations, each of these groups of people in which he's established the borders, that is a nation. And in so doing, Yahweh then disinherits these nations. Prior to this point, Yahweh had a relationship with all of humanity, but now he's telling them, you don't want me, then I don't want you. You're going to get a son of God, a lesser God, a created Elohim to watch over you. And then we read in verse 9, but the Lord's portion is his people. Jacob is his allotted heritage. Look at that verse. Jacob is Yahweh's allotted heritage. Yahweh is stating that Jacob, or Israel, because remember, Jacob's name would be changed to Israel. That is what he represents. The nation of Israel would be Yahweh's heritage. And at this point, when you're reading in this verse, there is no Jacob. There is no Israel. But immediately following the Genesis 11 story, remember, we read in Genesis 12 that God chooses Abraham, whose grandson will be Jacob, who is later renamed Israel. So, Yahweh decreed, following the Tower of Babel that was built at the city of Babel, that these newly formed nations would have other gods besides him to watch over them. Just to repeat what I've already said, basically Yahweh is saying to these nations, you don't want to obey me? Then I'm not interested in being your God. That's what he's doing. I'm going to match you up with lesser created gods, lesser created Elohim. So, Yahweh, following the Tower of Babel story, disinherits these people. He divides them into nations, where each nation will now have a member of God's divine council, a son of God, to supervise them, to watch over them. Now, before I go further, there is a very interesting side note that I want to add to this fact of God disinheriting the people at Babel and dividing them into nations. It's very interesting when you're reading in Genesis 10. Remember, this is that chapter that's dealing with all the genealogies of Noah's sons. Well, in the generational line of Shem, you're going to discover an often overlooked fact. To Shem also, the father of the children of Eber, the elder brother of Japheth, children were born. To Eber were born 2 sons. The name of one was Peleg, for in his days the earth was divided. Note that. In the days of Peleg, a descendant of Shem, the earth was divided. The writer is showing you and me that as these generations expanded, there was a specific time when the earth was divided. There was a time when the earth, that is, boundaries being established, the nations being established. And this dividing of the earth, as we know, is when Yahweh formed the nations, when he established the boundaries around these nations. Wow. That is so very interesting. So, let's kind of summarize here because I've covered a lot, but we've got more to look at. We've established that Yahweh has disinherited the people at Babel. He's formed them into nations. This is where these nations come from, with clear boundaries. He's drawn the lines around these nations, cosmic geography. Each of these lands were unique to these people. He then assigns a member of his divine council, a son of God, to watch over these newly established nations. But somewhere along the line, these sons of God, these that were assigned to watch over each of these various nations, well, these sons of God rebelled. They became divine rivals to Yahweh. Their rule over the nations that were assigned to them became corrupt. In fact, as we're going to see in just a moment, it became very corrupt. These lesser created beings, these lesser created gods, Elohim, they began to receive the worship of the nations over which they were assigned. And you see this outcome in Deuteronomy, when Israel is warned clearly, very clearly by Yahweh, not to worship these lesser gods, also called the host of heaven. Beware, lest you raise your eyes to heaven. This is Yahweh speaking to Israel. Beware, lest you raise your eyes to heaven, and when you see the sun and the moon and the stars, all the host of heaven, you be drawn away and bow down to them and serve them. Please see this. Yahweh is warning Israel not to get caught up in worshiping the host of heaven, these lesser created gods of the nations around them. He tells them not to worship the host of heaven, not to bow down and serve them, not to bow down and serve these gods. Why? Well, the latter part of the verse gives us the why. Things that the Lord your God has allotted to all the peoples under the whole heaven. Did you catch that? Israel is not to bow down and serve these gods because these gods, these created gods, were allotted to other people. They were not allotted to Israel. They were allotted to the peoples under the whole of heaven, the nations that are around Israel. And Israel is to have nothing to do with these gods. Yahweh has fixed the borders of these disinherited people at Babel according to the number of the sons of God. Members of Yahweh's divine council, the sons of God, were matched up with each nation. These created gods, they were assigned by Yahweh to watch over these various nations. But as we've seen, these Elohim, these sons of God, they become corrupt. They begin to receive. They begin to accept the worship of the people they oversaw. In addition, they were overseeing the nations in a very, very unjust fashion. And as a result, these created gods were judged by Yahweh. And we read about this in Psalm 82. Now, I think it'd be very helpful to examine this entire psalm. Now, relax, it's only 8 verses long, but believe me, my friends, it's packed with a lot of information that you and I need to understand. So let's begin in verse 1. God has taken his place in the divine council. In the midst of the gods, in the midst of Elohim, he holds judgment. We see in verse 6 that these gods are in fact the sons of God. They are the ones who make up Yahweh's divine council. And it's as we're reading in this, we see that now God has taken his place in the midst of this council. And he's going to say something now to these sons of God. How long will you judge unjustly and show partiality to the wicked? In other words, how long are you going to continue to be corrupt in your rule over the nations assigned to you? Yahweh then commands these gods to give justice to the weak and the fatherless, maintain the right of the afflicted and the destitute, rescue the weak and the needy, deliver them from the hand of the wicked. Why is Yahweh telling these gods to take these actions over the people of these nations? Yahweh makes it clear that the people of these nations, they have neither knowledge nor understanding. They walk about in darkness. All the foundations of the earth are shaken. In other words, these nations are blind, and they stumble about in their sin and rebellion. And Yahweh then pronounces judgment on these corrupt gods and their corrupt rule over these nations. I said, that's Yahweh speaking, you are gods, Elohim, sons of the Most High, all of you. Nevertheless, like men, you shall die and fall like any prince. These created gods, these sons of God, there is a time coming when their immortality will be taken. They are going to die like any human. And then, at this juncture, the psalmist makes a very bold request. Arise, O God, judge the earth, for you shall inherit all the nations. Did you see that last part? For you, O God, shall inherit all the nations. In that request, we see that the rule of these created gods will one day be ended. It will be no more, and God will inherit or take back the nations. Yahweh will reclaim these nations he once disinherited when he scattered the people at Babel in Genesis 11. And here is what's so interesting. This brings us full circle right back to the calling of Abraham in Genesis 12, following the disinheriting of these people at Babel. Remember what Yahweh, that is, said to Abraham when he called him in Genesis 12? I will make you a great nation. I will bless you and make your name great, so that you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and him who dishonors you I will curse. And in you all the families of the earth shall be blessed. All the families of the earth, all of these disinherited nations, all of these people around Israel, they are going to be blessed through Abraham. This is what he's saying to him. He's telling him that through his descendants, which in time would become the nation of Israel, that all the nations Only Abraham doesn't understand any of this at this point, but we can see it now because we're looking back. These disinherited nations at Babel, they are going to be, at least the goal, to be brought back into the fold of Yahweh, to be brought back into relationship with Yahweh, and the conduit would be Israel, the nation of Israel. This is why Israel is called a holy nation, a nation of priests, a royal priesthood. Let me read to you in Exodus 19. You, that is Israel, you shall be my treasured possession among all peoples, that is all the nations. For all the earth is mine, all the nations are mine, and you shall be to me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. What Yahweh is telling them is that they, as Israel, they were to be a light to the nations that surrounded them. They are to be a kingdom of priests representing Yahweh to the disinherited nations around them. And the intent is to draw them back to Yahweh. As a kingdom of priests, Israel would serve as a conduit for the return of the punished nations to the true God. But we all know the rest of that story. Israel floundered, and they floundered in a bad way. They failed. But people, God did not give up. This reclaiming of the nations is still in progress, following the death, resurrection, and ascension of Jesus. Oh my, there is so much more to this story. I don't have time right now to get into all of that. But you remember when Paul would write about Jesus ascending to the right hand of the Father, that is, to the place of authority? Paul made it very clear that Jesus ascended far above all principalities, all powers, all dominions, all rulers. He now rules. And those expressions, principalities, powers, dominions, rulers, this is Paul's way of talking about the gods of the other nations. Their authority, their power is gone. There is one who is ascended far above. They've not gone away. Oh no. That's why Paul says we don't wrestle with flesh and blood. We're in a struggle that's much deeper, much broader, much bigger. But before I really launch into all of that, that really is the subject of another video. But let me say this to you. Thanks so much for taking the time to watch this particular video. I do appreciate you doing that. And by the way, if you've got some comments or questions, please put them in the comment section below. And if you've not taken a moment to like this video, or you've not yet become a subscriber, then like the video and subscribe to this channel. And as I like to always say, as I bring every video to conclusion, God's very best to you.